Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Whenever you find yourself out there getting a little distraught, at disarray, or just probably find yourself with your compass a little out of focus, maybe it's about time that you should take a trip out into nature. Many of us are drawn to nature, but perhaps we just don't know how we can find the healing properties and possibilities that exist within nature's boundaries. On the program, we're going to be talking with someone who for more than a decade has helped support individuals in cultivating health and well-being. She has served as a wilderness guide, ecotherapist, vocal coach, and intuitive healer, as well as working as a psychotherapist since 2008. She has also worked independently and collaboratively with allopathic physicians and alternative healing. She has been drawn to the work of helping people go into nature to be enlightened by nature, to be able to get themselves back on track. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program our guest today, Zoe Presley. Zoe, how are you today?
I'm doing fine, Daniel. How are you?
I'm doing well. Are you talking with us from underneath a redwood tree right now?
I am talking with you from within an apple orchard right up against the cedar grove.
Well, there you go. As they say, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, right?
Exactly.
Now, tell us how we define nature and why is it helpful to spend time with nature?
Sure. So, in our language, nature has a wide spectrum of meaning. Nature can include dimensions of physical as well as metaphysical place, worldview, philosophy, relationship. Nature includes the plant and animal kingdoms, of course, as well as rocks, minerals, water, air, and fire. And nature refers to the basic substrate of our existence. Long before we were humans, nature was unfolding, expanding, and changing, and nature will continue to exist long after we're gone. But nature also refers to the essential character or basic constitution of a person or a thing, such as human nature. And I call my practice enlightened nature, to bring awareness to the essentially enlightened characteristic of the natural world, as well as for the opportunity for us to find our own enlightened state in conjunction with the natural world. So, given all of those meanings, being with nature is helpful because it encourages us to broaden our experience and our understanding of ourselves and the world. So, in essence, I'm more than the roles I play in relation to other people. I'm more than a mother or a friend or a wife or an aunt. I am who I am in relationship to this tree, this mountain, this bird, the feeling I have when I gaze into a campfire or when I walk through a dark forest. Being with nature is also helpful because it inspires us to step back from our interpretations of ourselves, of other people and events, and observe how nature responds and adapts to life. So if I can look at how this rock that has tumbled from the top of a cliff has responded to this great fall and being in a new place, that helps me put a different context on the things that I go through in my life. In addition, and this maybe is the most obvious, in the absence of technological stimuli, being with nature is intrinsically calming as we entrain or we match the pace of life, of nature, instead of the artificially constructed and sometimes chaotic pace of our modern world, which can be determined by computers and other technologies. And for many of us, being with nature reminds us of the freedom and innocent curiosity of our youth. I have memories of being a young girl, joyfully playing in the dirt, feeling wind on my face, smelling a fragrant flower for the first time, crunching on leaves in the fall. And finally, nature provides metaphor and analogy to help us better understand metaphysical, spiritual, and transpersonal concepts that language is sometimes unable to convey. And I'll give an example. David Hawkins, the renowned psychiatrist and consciousness researcher, gives us an explanation about enlightenment. He says, the personal I is content, whereas the I of reality is context. Now, just that phrase on its own might seem pretty obscure to many people. It doesn't really hit home and help us understand what enlightenment is. But then he goes on to give a nature metaphor. He says, the cloud is subject to change and dissolution. Weather comes and goes, but the sky itself remains the same. Enlightenment is merely the shift of identity from the cloud to the sky. So this is a definition and explanation that we can hang on to a bit more. We can look up at the sky and see a cloud and see how, as moisture evaporates, that the cloud changes and reforms, passes through the sky. So it has an individual identity that's separate, and yet the cloud is also part of the sky. We look up and we see the clouds as belonging in the sky. And if we consider ourselves as not only existing in an individual sense, but also growing and changing and becoming and being part of a greater oneness. Nature metaphor helps us understand this concept.
Now, when we think about healing and the idea that we go into nature to heal ourselves, would it be easier for a person just to go out and do this on their own, or what role does a therapist healer play in facilitating someone's healing within nature?
Sure. So clearly being out in nature is something that people do on their own all the time and experience great enjoyment and peace and even healing. A therapist or healer can just help encourage or deepen our connection to ourselves. So when we're experiencing pain or disconnection, we may have trouble or even resist surrendering to nature's healing presence. So a nature therapist or healer can gently support you in identifying how and why the pain or disconnection is interfering and help you transcend your discomfort. Sometimes when we're on our own, our pain can be distracting and even overwhelming, and having an objective and caring other person to encourage you can make the difference between giving up and staying on course to discover your truth and freedom. And there's another piece. I think that when most of us begin our relationship with nature, we think of it as a place to go to recreate, maybe to relax, to learn, to improve our intellectual understanding of the natural world. But being with nature in a healing way is really unlike any of those activities. It's really about developing a relationship with nature and surrendering to nature, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and to learn about ourselves in the context of nature. And having, like I said, an objective other person, a supportive other person, can really be helpful in that process, especially if we haven't done that before.
You know, I'm finding it kind of an interesting insight to step back and take a look at what you're saying here and realize that so many people like to go out and seemingly try to overtake and conquer nature. What do you think is going on there?
Well, it is an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? I subscribe to some outdoor magazines, and a lot of the articles are about bagging peaks and conquering mountains and rivers, and
even in the language, how to dominate that summit or overcome that raging white river, you know.
Exactly, and I believe that comes from an overall sense or need in our culture to dominate everything as humans, to dominate one another, to dominate countries and cultures. And so there's this prevailing sense that our role as humans is to dominate. But unfortunately, I think what we've learned in our time as humans is that domination doesn't really work out very well for us. That domination causes a lot of pain and loss and struggle. And so being in nature and learning about ourselves through the relationship that we have with nature, which is not about domination, not about control, that actually can extend to other areas of our life as we see how powerful an experience with nature can be when we're not trying to dominate or overwhelm. When we meet nature in the context of trying to learn from and learn with nature, then we can bring that experience to our relationships with our friends, family, coworkers, and in general feel less of a necessity to dominate others in order to feel safe, to feel content, to feel a heightened sense and understanding of who we are.
Now, Zoe, when you facilitate this healing therapy in nature, what sort of activities go on? What can a person expect when they do this?
Sure. So I'll give a few examples here. So instead of heading out on a walk or a hike and spending time, say, ruminating on your thoughts, you can set out with a tabula rasa of mind, with a clear slate, and allow yourself to experience childlike curiosity about things that you hear, see, smell, taste, touch, feel, really allowing yourself to be open as if it were a new experience. And there's another thing, you can imagine that you can communicate with nature. Experiment with asking questions of nature and notice what happens inside of you in the asking and receiving a response. And it's important to not judge yourself. If you observe children in nature, they're doing this all the time. They're asking plants how they feel. They're talking to birds and even grass. And as we become adults, there is a pressure, I think, to think about communicating in nature as a childlike, sort of silly thing to do. And I believe that's really unfortunate, because I think that there's a lot that we can learn in just opening dialogue to something, some other living being that cannot respond to us in our own language, that it requires us to open our hearts and open our minds to receive a different kind of response than we would if we were communicating with another person. Another activity you can do is to notice what happens when you relate your life experiences to things you see or feel in nature. For example, does that tree with a cracked branch remind you of your own wounding? And what do you think of when you see that slug moving so slowly across the trail? How do you feel when you watch a storm settle on top of a mountain range? Images from nature can create a framework in which we can better understand and build compassion for our own struggles and triumphs. So, for example, if we are injured emotionally or physically, and our relationship with that injury or that pain is victimization, we feel like a victim, we can look out in countless examples in nature and be inspired about how nature perseveres no matter what happens. Natural disaster, pollution, weather moving through, nature continues to persevere, and there isn't a sense of victimization with nature. Nature just continues to survive and thrive no matter what it experiences.
It sounds like such an enjoyable way for a person to go out and basically get some questions answered that perhaps just being in a regular routine wouldn't provide answers for her.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely, because I think in our daily lives, which unfortunately for most of us is spent in environments that are separated from nature, we settle into a routine of interacting with the things in our life in a certain way, from a framework and a belief system that we've settled into over the course of our lives. And in contrast, being in nature helps us to lay down some of those belief systems and be more open to the things happening in our life, to develop a different, perhaps deeper understanding of the experiences that we're having. And this is a pretty unique quality in nature.
I think it's fascinating when you consider this day and age the idea of camping. When somebody says roughing it, what they really mean is we're going to actually pitch a tent and sleep in a sleeping bag. versus being in a camper or a motorhome. And it's like, I always kind of, inside I smile when I see somebody who has the motorhome, and you think to themselves, well, they're just basically moving their home from where they live out somewhere else. But there's really no difference. They still have a television, the microwave oven. It's like, what kind of connection is really going on there? It certainly is different, for instance, when you actually cook your meal on a campfire versus on top of a stove.
Well, true, but even then, and I like to point this out, that even in a camper or even in an apartment building, that being with nature is a lot more about an experience rather than a location. So even if you live in an apartment building, say in a very crowded urban area like New York City, and you're not able to get outside, being with nature can be as simple as having a house plant and spending time with it. It doesn't necessarily mean going out into the rugged wilderness and roughing it. It can mean that, but it can also be much simpler experiences. And for some people, at least in the beginning, that can be a much safer, more comfortable way to interact with nature, just with a plant, just feeling and connecting with the plant energy, say. And then maybe that develops into going on a walk in the park. Maybe that develops into sitting on a park bench and just listening to bird calls. So I think there's another misconception, I think, that's promoted by some of these magazines and popular media about what it means to be a nature person in this day and age. And I think that there are so many different ways to be engaged with nature in a really meaningful and powerful way.
It's fascinating, Zoe, is that earlier this year we happened to have a gentleman by the name of Mick Dodge on the program. Mm-hmm. And what he's considered to be, and not my label, somebody else's, and I could never understand why he got this label, but anyway, he's known as the Forrest Gump of the forest. And anyway, National Geographic had did a series with this guy who just decided to kind of give it all up and just go and live in nature, And one of the things he talks about, now people might look at pictures of this guy and think, yeah, this is some far-out crazy hippie that just decided to kind of jump out of society and do his own thing. But, in speaking with this guy, there was a level of intelligence and lucidity that, at first sight you might look and go, well, this guy seems wacko. Why would he talk like this? But he was actually sharing, a lot of the wisdom that he was gaining over the years of being out there, just letting things go to allow, so to speak. One of the most fascinating things that he did was he talked about how he tried to go without shoes for the longest time. And he would say something like, do you realize that in the foot alone that there's some thousands of nerve endings down there, so you really feel yourself when you're out there walking through the woods or wherever it may be, Heaven forbid anybody who's ever been by a riverbed, for instance, with all the rocks, tried to walk without shoes, how uncomfortable that can feel. But when you think about it, that tension that perhaps walking across rocks by a riverbed, for instance, that maybe what you need to do is relax and trust that you'll be okay. So I can see what you're talking about when it comes to the ideal of metaphors in nature, about what your position is and your feeling and your reaction and actions of life are all about.
Sure. And actually I have an example that I think similarly illustrates this, if that's all right.
Absolutely, please.
Okay, so say you're in physical pain. Your arm was injured when you were bicycling, and you had to stop suddenly at an intersection because, unfortunately, a car coming from the opposite direction ran through their stop sign and caused you to become unsteady and fall off your bike. And say it's been a few days since the incident and you're all bandaged up, you're basically okay. But you feel a dull ache in your arm muscle, which is making it considerably more difficult to accomplish even minor tasks around the house with the ease that you're accustomed to. You're also aware of some emotional strife going on inside of you. You're angry at the driver who caused the accident and then who just drove off, leaving you in the road. basically you feel like a victim. And there's a whole lot of evidence that you can come up with that points to your victimization. The fact that there was a careless driver that just left the scene and left you there, the fact that you were hurt and you're still in pain. So you spend a few days feeling sorry for yourself, feeling like a victim, feeling angry at this other person. And then you decide to take a stroll through the woods. You start to ruminate on your physical pain and your anger. And then you notice something which distracts your train of thought. You see a large tree that was struck by lightning and had slivered into several large pieces, all which separated from the original trunk and were now splayed out in various directions. And one of the pieces fell on top of a small seedling. Now at first what you notice is a small innocent life crushed by another larger thing. You feel compassion for the seedling, and you feel sad for its perceived misfortune. You think of your accident, and you relate your suffering to this helpless victim, the seedling. Instead of the anger you've been feeling since your accident, now you're also aware of sadness. After a while, you look even more closely and notice that the seedling, although initially crushed by the impact of the much heavier piece of tree, is actually still alive. And the seedling had accommodated the blow by flexing its tiny fragile trunk and devoting its energy to sending out a vigorous new shoot. As you witness the scene, you consider the parallels between your accident and this young tree. You imagine what it might be like to be the young tree, flexible and devoting energy towards perseverance and new growth. And during your imagining, you don't even notice that your anger and some of your pain have dissipated. So in this example, healing is about being inspired to a state of empowerment and growth. If healing had an opposite, it would be something like stagnation or resistance. And we can look out in nature and experience that nature doesn't stagnate or resist. Nature only is continually moving towards states of new growth and of change. Nature gives us this beautiful inspiration. And if we can take that inspiration and apply it to our own lives, we might find ourselves being more courageous, more open-minded, more accepting of healing and growth in ourselves.
Yeah, it's just so beautifully put, Zoe. I was wondering, is there a website our listeners out there can find out more about your work and how they can get a hold of you?
Absolutely. My website is www.zoepresley.com. That's Z as in zebra, O-E, Presley.com. And I have another website which will also bring you to the same place. It's just www.enlightednature.com.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm curious, Zoe, as somebody comes to you, is there a certain intuition that you use when you decide an element of nature to take them to, like, well, let's go to the beach, or let's go into the woods, or let's go by a lake? You know, how do you usually decide where to go if, in fact, that's something you do?
Sure. Well, actually, Enlightened Nature is where I work. It's the name of my business, and it is actually a nature retreat in Portland's West Hills. And so my clients come and see me here at this location. My clients are adults who are seeking counseling and healing in the solace of nature. And so basically, as I am a licensed depth psychotherapist and healer, and I facilitate experiences for my clients who learn about and love themselves, transcend emotional and physical pain, and feel free and empowered. And so my practice involves a variety of experiential and discussion-based activities. And the retreat itself is located in a peaceful, natural setting on the edge of an apple orchard and abutting private forested walking trails. So we have the option of working together indoors in a comfortable, modernized yurt, or outside, walking or reclining, sitting in the sunshine, taking shelter from the rain or feeling the rain on our faces. So in this particular environment, we have several different options depending on really what my clients feel like they want in any given moment. And having this kind of flexibility is really unique in any kind of healing or counseling environment. But it's really up to the client and me working together to decide what's the best environment for a particular moment, for a particular day, to achieve a particular insight or experience.
That just sounds like such a wonderful process. I can see how you would be drawn to this kind of work. Has it been very enjoyable for you?
This is the most enjoyable thing that I could imagine doing with my life. I have been a lifelong nature lover. I have spent a lot of my life working outside with people in various different settings, and to be able to offer a retreat setting for clients to grow and heal and learn about themselves, and for me, frankly, for me to continue growing and learning about myself is an incredible gift, one that I feel very fortunate for and continues to deepen over time.
Well, Zoe, I completely agree with you that you have a special gift that you offer to people, but sometimes we just get a little tangled up and full of ourselves in life, and maybe it takes us getting out there and bumping into a tree or slipping down a hill to wake up and take a look around us, breathe in and out, smile, and say, you know, it isn't all that bad. At least I experienced pain that reminds me that I'm still alive, and that's good enough, isn't it?
Sure. And sometimes it is that simple, and sometimes it feels a little bit more complicated. And sometimes we can really use some support to get to that place of understanding and awareness, depending on the life experiences that we have or whatever challenges we're facing in a particular moment. So sometimes it's easy to allow ourselves to surrender to the flow of nature, and sometimes we resist a little bit, and that's human nature, to resist even when or if we know that something can be helpful. And so, again, having some support in that area can make a big difference.
Well, Zoe, one more time for our listeners, how they can find you again.
Sure. So I will also list my phone number here, which is 503-987-0121, or else you are welcome to check out my website, which is zoepresley.com or enlightenednature.com. And I'd love to hear from you. You could send me an email at zoe@zoepresley.com.
Very good. Zoe, thank you so much for taking the time out of nature to talk with me about nature.
Thank you, Daniel. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you again. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen out there listening in the virtual world. Be sure to check out nature and kind of get away from your devices and see and feel and taste and smell what's going on around you. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.